Do you know that suffocating feeling when someone blocks your only escape route during a fire? That's exactly what hit me when I discovered Karen from the HOA secretly plugging her Tesla charger into my outdoor outlet, sending my monthly electric bill soaring by nearly $300. But hold on, don't scroll away just yet, because the way my smart power protection system turned her $90,000 car into nothing more than a dead, useless hunk of metal is far more satisfying than you'd imagine. Before I jump into this shocking little saga, let me give you some background. People say good fences make good neighbors, but the truth is, sometimes even the best fences can't protect you from those entitled types who believe the rules apply to everyone except themselves. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in the Midwest, I was taught to respect other people's property, a value that seems utterly foreign to certain Tesla-driving suburbanites who love their designer sunglasses almost as much as they hate paying their own bills. What follows isn't just a story about stolen electricity, it's a carefully crafted lesson in consequences, one that I still take a bit of pride in. My grandfather used to say the best punishment for a thief isn't the police, it's an unexpected trap. When Deborah Harrington moved in next door with her gleaming white Tesla Model X, I had no clue she'd become my biggest headache. I'm Ethan Bailey, 35 years old, an electrical engineer working remotely for a tech firm in Seattle. Before this, I served 6 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, specializing in power grid systems and security infrastructure. That time in uniform drilled into me discipline, precision, and problem-solving skills, tools I never imagined I'd use in the suburban battlefield. For the past 3 years, I've lived in Pinewoods Estates, a quiet neighborhood with an active HOA. I bought the house after my divorce, nothing messy, just two people realizing they wanted different lives. Since then, I'd settled into a routine bachelor lifestyle, work, gaming with friends, the occasional barbecue. It was peaceful, calm, ordinary, that is, until Hurricane Deborah stormed into the community. Looking back, I should have caught the warning signs when the previous owners of her home practically sprinted out of the neighborhood, selling at well below market value just to relocate quickly for a new job. Now I understand that they probably just wanted to escape before Deborah unleashed her grand plans, like building that oversized infinity pool in her backyard. I first met her when I stopped by with a welcome basket of local craft beer, handmade chocolates, and a flyer with neighborhood info. I'm not a natural social butterfly, but my Midwestern upbringing insists on good manners. How thoughtful, she said with a polished smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was dressed in her standard uniform, a designer yoga pants that had never seen a yoga mat, a cashmere sweater in warm weather, and enough jewelry to set off TSA alarms. As she invited me in for a quick tour, she repeatedly emphasized words like premium, exclusive, and top of the line while describing every piece of furniture and appliance. The modest colonial had been remodeled into what she clearly saw as her suburban palace. This island is imported Italian marble, she said, brushing her manicured hand across a countertop bigger than my entire kitchen. We had to wait 6 months, but William, my husband, he's a corporate attorney, very successful, insisted on only the best for our forever home. She mentioned his job and success at least 3 more times during that 15-minute tour. When she asked about my house, her eyes narrowed, and she referred to it as quaint with the same tone you'd use to describe a rundown gas station restroom. When I told her I was an engineer, her interest dropped instantly. Unless you were a doctor, lawyer, or hedge fund manager, you simply didn't exist in Deborah Harrington's social universe. That first meeting should have been my red flag, a blaring siren I foolishly ignored. In the weeks that followed, Deborah launched what I can only describe as a strategic takeover of the neighborhood. She cozied up to the HOA board with a mix of flattery, intimidation, and well-timed generosity. Her dinner parties became infamous not for a lively conversation, but for the absurdly overpriced wine she flaunted and the constant name-dropping that came with every sip. Within 6 weeks of moving in, she had somehow secured the position of HOA vice president. The previous VP, Dorothy, a retired school principal who had faithfully served for 7 years, suddenly resigned for personal reasons. Later, I learned those reasons involved Deborah digging up Dorothy's son's old DUI and threatening to expose it. At the time, I wasn't involved. I kept busy with work projects and occasional gaming sessions with friends. Neighborhood politics, in my eyes, was its own special form of torture, so I stayed far away. My rule was simple: pay dues, follow the rules, mind my own business. That philosophy lasted until the month after Deborah arrived, when I opened my electric bill and nearly fell over. $450, almost triple my usual $150. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. I called the power company, but the rep confirmed the reading was accurate. The power company rep assured me the reading was accurate and suggested I might have a faulty appliance or had drastically changed my usage habits. That didn't sit right with me, so I checked and double-checked everything. I walked through the house with an energy monitor, testing every major appliance one by one. Nothing explained the outrageous jump in cost. The real clue came from my neighbors, the Andersons, a retired couple living on my other side. They mentioned casually that their bill had stayed the same. That told me whatever was sucking down power was happening only on my property. A week later, the mystery unraveled thanks to my security system. At 2 in the morning, I got a motion alert. Half asleep, I opened the app on my phone and nearly fell out of bed. There was Deborah, dressed in designer pajamas and a silk robe, creeping through my backyard with a long extension cord. She plugged it into the outlet I usually used for yard tools, then snaked the cord along our property line, hiding it neatly behind the shrubs she had once recommended the HOA plant for neighborhood aesthetics. On the other end, her Tesla, parked so the charging port faced directly toward my fence. I sat there, stunned, watching her double-check the connection before scurrying back into her house like some bizarre, electricity-stealing goblin. The next morning, I marched over to her front door, phone in hand, video queued up. She answered in an expensive tennis outfit, flashing that flawless, fake smile. "Deborah, we need to talk about you charging your Tesla with my electricity," I said bluntly. Her smile didn't falter. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Ethan," she replied with a light laugh. I hit play and showed her the video. Instantly, her expression hardened. "That could be anyone," she said, despite her face being crystal clear in the footage. "And frankly, if your electrical system is so outdated that it's causing outrageous bills, maybe you should upgrade." Maintaining property values is everyone's responsibility, after all. Then, as she started closing the door, she added sweetly, "And by the way, as HOA Vice President, I'd be happy to discuss your landscaping violations. Your hedges are 2 inches above regulation height." Walking back to my house, I knew this wasn't going to end here. What I didn't realize was that it was only the beginning of a 6-month war, a proof that not all Karens are just internet punchlines. Some are far more dangerous. After catching her red-handed, I thought I could protect myself by taking simple precautions. I installed more security cameras and locked my outdoor outlets inside metal boxes. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Within 2 days, I got an official violation letter from the HOA. According to the notice, my lock boxes were unauthorized exterior modifications and had to be removed immediately. The letter was signed by Gregory Palmer, the HOA inspector, but I could see Deborah's fingerprints all over it. Gregory was a 58-year-old ex-middle manager who'd been laid off years earlier. Now, he wielded his clipboard and rulebook like they were holy scripture. The next day, he appeared at my door, chest puffed out like he was delivering justice. "Mr. Bailey, I'm here to confirm compliance with the removal order," he said stiffly. I tried to explain about Deborah stealing my electricity and even showed him the footage. He didn't budge. "That's a private dispute between neighbors. The HOA doesn't get involved. But these lockboxes, those are my jurisdiction." Under his watchful eye, I removed them. As I did, I caught the smell of expensive cologne and noticed the shiny new watch on his wrist. Later, another neighbor clued me in that Deborah had been hosting little appreciation happy hours for HOA board members, where fine scotch flowed as freely as her flattery. That weekend, I finally decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting, my first since moving in. It was held in the community clubhouse. About 30 homeowners stuffed into uncomfortable folding chairs. When the floor opened for resident concerns, I raised my hand. "I'd like to address unauthorized use of private electricity," I began, paperwork in hand. But before I could finish, Deborah's voice cut in smoothly. Point of order. Personal disputes aren't appropriate for the general agenda. They should be submitted in writing to the board. Frank, the HOA president, a balding man who always looked half-dazed, nodded quickly. Yes, yes. Procedure must be followed. Submit it in writing and we'll review it at the next meeting. I sat down, frustrated, as Deborah shot me a smug little smile from her seat at the board table. Then came the real bombshell. Frank cleared his throat. Next item. Approval for installation of community charging stations in the common areas. My head snapped up. Deborah stood, holding a glossy presentation folder. As we all know, she began with rehearsed enthusiasm. Green energy is the future. I propose we install 4 level 2 charging stations. A broken bar. Deborah's pitch was polished. She proposed installing 4 level 2 charging stations near the community center parking area. According to her, this would boost property values and show Pinewoods Estates as a forward-thinking, environmentally conscious neighborhood. What she didn't mention was that one of those charging stations would be positioned just a few yards from her house in the common area that bordered my property. After the meeting, I stuck around to review the documents and nearly exploded when I saw the fine print. The electricity for these charging stations would be billed directly to the HOA and spread evenly across all homeowners as part of our monthly dues. In other words, Deborah had devised a scheme to get the entire neighborhood to pay for fueling her Tesla. As I studied the installation maps, an uncomfortable realization hit me. This wasn't just my battle anymore. She had effectively turned the whole neighborhood into her personal energy supplier, and most residents had no clue they were being conned. If I was going to stop her, I needed to know the rules inside and out. Over the next few weeks, I dug deep into HOA bylaws, local ordinances, and electrical codes. My time in the military had taught me that winning any fight requires intelligence as much as firepower, and I intended to use both. That's when I met Martha Wilson. She was 68, a widow who had lived in Pinewoods Estates since the first foundation was poured. Sharp eyes, sharper tongue, and a mind like a filing cabinet. Martha seemed to know everything about everyone. That Harrington woman, she muttered over coffee at her kitchen table, has half the board eating out of her hand like trained poodles. Martha had kept meticulous notes on HOA dealings for years and showed me a disturbing pattern. Board members who resisted Deborah's initiatives were pressured into resigning. Gregory's not a bad man, she confided. Just weak. Always has been, even before his wife left him for her yoga instructor. And Frank, our so-called president, he's counting the days till his term ends so he can escape to Florida. Through Martha, I was introduced to Brian and Sarah Thompson, a couple in their 40s with 2 young children. Brian taught high school. Sarah worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and both were struggling to keep up with rising HOA fees. We can barely afford the dues as it is, Sarah explained when I visited their home one evening. If they increase again, Tommy might have to quit baseball. Their 8-year-old son, Tommy, was in the living room showing my security footage of the electricity thief to his little sister, the two of them giggling like they were watching a cartoon villain. With their help, I started building a case. I discreetly installed a power monitoring device on my electrical panel and began recording the drain. On average, Deborah was pulling 75 kilowatt-hours every single night, at local rates, that added up to a shocking amount over time. Brian and Sarah canvassed for me, collecting signatures from neighbors worried about rising fees, while Martha dug up critical bylaw loopholes that could support our challenge. By the time the next HOA meeting approached, I had assembled a complete dossier of video evidence, consumption data, cost breakdowns, and the backing of 23 households demanding the charging station proposal include individual metering. For the first time, I felt ready to face her. The night before the meeting, I was reviewing my presentation when Martha called. Her voice was tight with frustration. Ethan, they postponed the meeting. Supposedly, the projector in the clubhouse isn't working. But I just drove by at Deborah's car is parked at Frank's house. Something's going on. The following day, I watched Deborah chatting with board members at the community mailbox, leaning in close, whispering like a puppeteer pulling strings. That's when it hit me. Sometimes you can't win by playing fair. If she was going to twist the rules, I would need to design something she couldn't manipulate. Fortunately for me, I was more than just a homeowner. I was a former Army engineer with expertise in electrical defense systems. Maybe it was time to put those skills to use. Still, I wanted to give her one final chance to resolve this peacefully. The next morning, I gathered all my documentation of videos, photographs, calculations into a neatly organized folder. Her house looked even more extravagant now than it had months earlier. New landscaping with imported Japanese maples framed the yard, and the front entrance had been completely redone with carved double doors that probably cost more than my first car. This time, her husband William answered. He was tall, mid-40s, with an expensive haircut that failed to hide his thinning hairline. His stand had the practiced look of someone who played golf not for pleasure, but for networking. William stood there in an expensive suit, even though it was a Saturday. Subtle pinstripes, monogrammed cuffs, his whole presence screamed I bill at $500 an hour. I'd barely seen him since they moved in. He was the picture of the absent corporate warrior, out early, home late, barely part of the neighborhood. "Deborah's at Pilates," he said, glancing at his Rolex as it caught the sunlight. His tone carried the impatience of someone whose time was far too valuable to waste. "Can this wait?" I explained that it couldn't, showing him the evidence of his wife's nightly activities. He reluctantly let me step into their marble-floored entryway, but no further. It was clear this wasn't hospitality, just a transaction. He flipped through my carefully prepared folder with the indifference of someone scanning a takeout menu he had no interest in ordering from. After a minute, he handed it back. "Look," he said flatly, "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. We're talking about a few dollars worth of electricity, not worth making a fuss." The dismissiveness in his voice burned. What was a significant sum to me was pocket change to him, the type of man who wouldn't bother bending down to pick up a $20 bill. Before I could point out that it wasn't about the money, it was about theft, he glanced at his phone, frowned, and used it as an exit strategy. "I've got a call with Tokyo in 5 minutes, he muttered, already retreating toward his home office. "Why don't you two work this out like adults? Don't blow trivial neighborhood stuff out of proportion." And with that, he closed the door in my face, leaving me on the porch with my evidence and the sinking realization that both Harringtons shared the same flaw, complete blindness to anything beyond their own privilege. That afternoon, Deborah stormed across our lawns, designer sunglasses perched on her head, fury written across her face. "How dare you go behind my back to William?" she hissed, her voice low enough that the neighbors wouldn't hear. I stayed calm, explaining again that she needed to stop stealing my electricity and warning her that I would fight her charging station plan at the next home meeting. Her cheeks flushed, her smile gone. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she whispered. "William is one of the top corporate attorneys in the state. One word from him, and your little remote job could disappear. One complaint about your behavior and suddenly, that military history of yours doesn't look so heroic." The threat was crystal clear: back off, or she'd destroy my reputation and career. In the days that followed, I noticed the shift. Neighbors who once greeted me warmly now avoided eye contact. At the grocery store, people I chatted with for years suddenly found excuses to walk the other way. The answer came when Brian called to cancel our planning session. "I'm sorry, man," he said hesitantly. "There's a rumor going around. People are saying you've been a broken bar unstable since your military days, that you've become obsessed with Deborah, that you're stalking her property at night." I was speechless. Deborah had twisted my security measures to the very cameras I'd installed to protect myself into weapons against me. "Sarah and I know it's not true," Brian added quickly, "but some folks are distancing themselves. They're saying those cameras were for watching her, not catching her stealing power." When I hosted a small meeting at my place, only Martha and the Thompsons showed up. The rest sent apologetic messages, citing sudden obligations. Our support was thinning fast. As we discussed options, Martha delivered more bad news. "She's convinced the board to authorize new landscaping for the common area near your property," she said grimly. "Work starts at 7 a.m. every day, weekends included. And guess what? The cost is being billed to you as a special assessment since they say it primarily benefits your property line." That night, after everyone left, I sat in my garage workshop surrounded by tools and parts. I realized I had only one path left. If Deborah wanted a battle, I'd fight with the one thing I had in engineering. As both a former Army engineer and an electrical specialist, I knew I could design something entirely legal but devastatingly effective, a system that protected my property, complied with every regulation, and yet rendered her schemes useless. I decided to build a smart power protection system, a setup commonly used in industrial environments to block theft and irregular usage. My design would detect unauthorized power draw at unusual times, automatically shut it down if abuse was detected, and even send a subtle voltage fluctuation warning to alert the offender just enough to spook them, without any safety risk. Over the next few days, my garage transformed into a workshop. I carefully assembled each component, programming and stress testing the system. This wasn't some jury-rigged DIY trick. It was built with the same precision I applied in my professional work. The SPS came equipped with multiple safety redundancies. A broken bar. I programmed the Smart Power Protection System, SPS, to incorporate voltage monitoring, current sensing, time of use restrictions, and, most critically, a tiered warning system set to activate well before any protective action would occur. It recorded every electrical event and compiled detailed logs of anomalous patterns, data that would prove pivotal later. The hardware struck the perfect balance between simplicity and strength. I used industrial-grade components housed within a weatherproof enclosure built to withstand the relentless Pacific Northwest rain, and even added battery backup to keep the system online during outages. This wasn't overkill, this was professional craftsmanship. After 3 days of development and testing, I installed the SPS at the rear of my property, right where Deborah had been plugging into my outdoor outlets. It was mounted following strict electrical code, with a crystal clear, professionally printed warning sign, protected by SPS, authorized use only. Unauthorized use may damage connected devices. The sign featured standardized electrical hazard icons and came with a small LED for night visibility. Its visual clarity made it impossible to claim ignorance. I even took time-stamped photos to document that everything was properly installed and prominently labeled. To ensure full legal and safety compliance, I re-reviewed the National Electrical Code and consulted a contractor friend who's now a city inspector. The system was designed to be completely safe for normal users. Protective actions only triggered after multiple ignored warnings, and even then, it would induce a controlled voltage fluctuation before shutting off. The only way damage could occur was if someone intentionally overrode the warnings. Essentially, they'd need to deliberately break their own equipment. One cool evening, as I watched the diagnostic LEDs blink through the final test sequence, it occurred to me that Deborah might not grasp the most fundamental lesson of physics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Back in my military days we used to say, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. She was about to experience both lessons firsthand. The next morning, I watched from my kitchen as Deborah noticed the new device during her routine patrol of the property line. She stopped, stared at the sign, rolled her eyes, and walked on. That evening, a new HOA violation notice landed in my mailbox. Unauthorized signage. However, the warning sign qualified as a legally required safety notification for electrical installations under county code, so I submitted supporting documentation citing the relevant regulations, leaving Gregory with nothing to argue. In the days that followed, my security feed showed Deborah lingering near the outlet but never plugging in. I imagined the warning had worked. Then Martha delivered news. Deborah had moved her search to the clubhouse testing outlets there, but those were underpowered for a quick charge, and inconveniently far from her driveway. Still, I savored the small win. Until I learned the HOA board had approved an emergency upgrade to electrical infrastructure in the common areas. They bypassed the usual resident vote claiming it was a critical safety improvement. Suddenly, workers were installing high-capacity outlets right in the common zone bordering my property, and the ball was just as she had long planned, but now fast-tracked. That very night, the cameras captured Deborah confidently connecting her Tesla to one of these new community outlets. She waved smugly to my camera before strutting back to her house. The SPS recorded every detail of her, drawing vast amounts of off-peak power. And yet again, the cost would be shared equally by all homeowners. I expanded the SPS to monitor these new community outlets, not to control them, since they weren't on my property, but to gather usage data. And as the system began logging their activity, Deborah had developed a strict routine every night between 1 and 4 in the morning. Her Tesla pulled maximum current for 3 solid hours. At the going electricity rates, she was quietly piling nearly $500 each month onto the shared HOA bill. Meanwhile, my mailbox continued to fill with absurd violation notices. My mailbox supposedly sat half an inch too low. My garage door needed repainting despite being freshly painted the previous year, and my trash cans were cited for being visible from the street for a whole 15 minutes on pickup day. I complied with every single notice, carefully documenting the process, all while building quiet momentum among sympathetic neighbors. The Thompsons had begun showing my collected data to their trusted circle, and word was spreading. A small but growing network of homeowners was starting to question Deborah's behavior. Through Martha's connections, I discovered Deborah's bigger play. She planned to propose the installation of a Tesla supercharger station in the community center, LOTA, costing $25,000 to be paid for through a special assessment on every homeowner. That bombshell proposal was set to be unveiled at the rescheduled home meeting, just 2 weeks away. While reviewing SPS logs one evening, I noticed a strange pattern. Whenever Deborah charged her car, she forced it into maximum draw mode right away, bypassing the Tesla's built-in gradual ramp-up feature. This was unusual and reckless, potentially harmful to both her vehicle and the grid. Tesla's battery management system wasn't designed for that kind of aggressive surge. My SPS, however, was specifically programmed to detect unsafe patterns, issue warnings, and, if ignored, initiate protective measures. I hadn't tampered with the protocols, so they were industry standard, but I double-checked that every warning signal was bright, audible, and impossible to miss. The night before the home meeting, my security system alerted me at the usual hour. Deborah strolled up to her favorite outlet, Tesla gleaming under the moonlight. The SPS instantly registered the connection and spike. As written into the design, a yellow warning light began flashing on the box, accompanied by a steady beeping to signal abnormal usage. Instead of easing off, Deborah scowled at the warning, then deliberately cranked the charge even higher, almost daring the system to stop her. I watched, incredulous, as she smirked at what she assumed was my petty scare tactic. SPS executed its sequence flawlessly, 3 warning cycles, then a controlled voltage fluctuation, followed by a full power cut-off. My monitor confirmed every safeguard triggered exactly as designed. Deborah hadn't just ignored the signals, she had intensified the hazard. A new alert pinged my camera feed. Deborah stood frozen beside her Tesla, eyes wide, staring at the error message now displayed on her dashboard. The realization hit: this system was no bluff. The following morning, I was halfway through a cup of coffee when furious pounding rattled my door. Through the peephole, I saw Deborah in silk pajamas, face twisted with rage. "Open this door right now, you vindictive little man!" she screamed, loud enough for half the block to hear. I calmly opened the door, mug still in hand. "Good morning, Deborah. Is something wrong?" Her eyes blazed as she jabbed her finger at me. "You know damn well what's wrong. You destroyed my car. My Tesla is brick-heated, completely dead. The diagnostics say it was a power surge. You did this." Neighbors began drifting onto their driveways, drawn by the commotion. I kept my tone steady, speaking clearly for all to hear. I installed a standard smart protective system to prevent unauthorized power use. The warnings about misuse were clear and posted. "Did something happen while you were charging from community power at 1 in the morning?" Color rose in Deborah's cheeks as she realized others were listening. She lowered her voice to a hiss. "You sabotaged my car. Do you know how much this will cost? $22,000 to replace the battery management system. William is already on the phone with our lawyer." I stepped back inside briefly and returned with the system documentation. "Here are the specs, safety certifications, and warning protocols. The device is designed to safeguard against dangerous usage, exactly like what occurred last night when you ignored the flashing lights and pushed the system harder." For the record, I added, gesturing to the security camera overhead. "I also have footage of you deliberately overriding those warnings." Right on cue, William's Mercedes pulled up. He ended the call and strode toward us, phone still in hand, his expression grim. William arrived, looking more irritated than surprised at the chaos. He gave me a curt nod. "Ethan, Deborah tells me you've wrecked our Tesla with some sort of homemade electrical trap." I silently handed him the technical documents. Unlike Deborah, William actually read them, his frown deepening as he flipped through page after page. "This clearly states the system issues multiple warning signals before shutting down," he said, glancing toward his wife. "Did you see any of those warnings?" Deborah mumbled defensively about irrelevant blinking lights. When I offered to show William the video of her ignoring the alerts, he raised a hand. "That won't be necessary." "Not yet." I decided it was time to be blunt. "William, your wife has been siphoning power first from me personally, and now from the community. I've kept detailed records, videos, usage logs, and testimony from neighbors. She even pushed the HOA into funding charging outlets that almost exclusively benefit her. I've tried addressing this directly with you both, multiple times." William's lawyer-like instincts were working overtime. I could see it. "And one more thing," I added, "redirecting HOA funds for personal use could fall under fraud, especially when someone in leadership steers resources primarily for their own gain." For the first time, William's controlled demeanor cracked. He turned to Deborah, whose defiance had melted into unease. "We'll discuss this at home." As they walked off, I caught him muttering, $22,000? And you've been doing what with home money? That afternoon, Deborah's prized Tesla was hoisted onto a tow truck, bound for the service center. The diagnostic confirmed severe damage to the battery management system, with repairs estimated at $22,000. Worse still for Deborah, Tesla denied warranty coverage. The issue was flagged as improper charging and ignoring safety warnings. As her car was hauled away, Deborah glared at me with venom. "Don't think you've won, Ethan. The HOA is on my side." I sipped my coffee, unbothered. "Actually, I've already requested a special HOA meeting. I think everyone deserves to see the evidence here and to know exactly who's been running up their electricity bills." The following week, the community clubhouse was overflowing. Neighbors who rarely exchanged more than a wave at the mailbox now crowded shoulder to shoulder, murmuring in anticipation. Nearly every household was represented, with late arrivals forced to stand against the walls. I'd come early to set up, but Martha was already there, stacking papers with military precision. "Some light reading," she winked, sliding me a copy. It was a fully annotated record of every HOA financial decision over the last 6 months, each violation highlighted and backed by bylaw citations. Clearly, she'd been preparing for this confrontation far longer than I had realized. Frank, the HOA president, looked pale and sweaty as he called the meeting to order. Retirement in Florida had seemed so close for him until Deborah's schemes pulled him into the mess. His hands shook as he adjusted his glasses, and his eyes darted nervously toward Martha, who was calmly handing out her documentation to the attendees. Deborah sat front and center, arms crossed, dressed in an outfit worth more than most people's mortgage payments. Her expression was thunderous. William was conspicuously missing. Apparently business in Tokyo had called again. We have a special presentation this evening," Frank stammered, his voice cracking as he avoided Deborah's glare. "Ethan Bailey has requested time to address a community concern." The room hushed as I stepped forward, laptop in hand. Despite the tension, I felt steady. This was no different than the military briefings I'd given in the past, except now the battlefield was my own neighborhood. From the corner of my eye, I spotted Brian and Sarah Thompson giving me encouraging thumbs-ups. Their kids sat beside them with coloring books. I had asked Brian earlier if this meeting was too heavy for children, but he'd simply replied, "They should see that standing up to bullies matters." That was exactly why I trusted the Thompsons. I connected my laptop to the projector and began laying out my evidence: security footage of Deborah charging illegally, detailed power usage charts, and clear calculations of the financial impact. "For the last 6 months," I explained, "the Harrington household has consumed an additional broken bar." The data revealed that the Harringtons had been consuming around 75 kilowatt-hours of electricity every single night, siphoned directly from community sources. At current rates, that equated to roughly $500 per month added to everyone's HOA bills. Gasps and murmurs spread through the room as I projected a graph showing how HOA fees had mysteriously spiked in perfect alignment with Deborah's charging patterns. I pressed on, explaining how the so-called emergency electrical upgrades had been rushed through without a legitimate community vote, all for the purpose of sustaining this ongoing misuse of shared resources. I also clarified that the SPS system I had installed was not some dangerous contraption but a standard industrial safety mechanism certified, regulated, and equipped with clear visual and audible alerts. The evidence showed that Deborah ignored these warnings deliberately, escalating the power draw until her Tesla's system failed. A video clip sealed the point. Deborah glanced at the blinking warnings, then defiantly increased the current. The tension broke when she leapt to her feet, cheeks red with fury. "This is character assassination," she snapped. "He's been stalking me with his cameras, and now this absurd presentation." The board should remind everyone that unauthorized recordings of board members are against policy. But her commanding tone had weakened. From the back, Brian Thompson stood up, his voice steady but heavy with frustration. "My family has been barely keeping up with these inflated HOA fees. We even had to pull our son out of baseball because we couldn't cover both the equipment and these surprise charges. Are you telling me we've all been footing the bill to charge your Tesla?" That question ignited the room. Retired neighbors on fixed incomes, young families living paycheck to paycheck, one after another they spoke up, realizing how much they had sacrificed while funding Deborah's personal luxury. Even Gregory Palmer, the HOA inspector who never hesitated to cite me for minor infractions, sat frozen, hiding behind his clipboard while the anger of the community grew. William Harrington was, predictably, nowhere to be seen. Another urgent business trip had conveniently pulled him away. Frank, the HOA president, tried desperately to cool things down. "Perhaps we should form a committee to further investigate these claims," he stammered. But Martha Wilson's voice cut through like a gavel. "I move for an immediate vote, full restitution of stolen funds, removal of Deborah Harrington from the board, and a complete re-election of all HOA positions." Her motion was seconded by more voices than could be counted. The result wasn't even close. By an overwhelming margin, the community voted for change. Deborah was ordered to repay nearly $7,000 in stolen electricity, stripped of her board seat on the spot, and a special election was scheduled. Brian Thompson, encouraged by his neighbors, accepted a nomination for board president on the promise of fairness and transparency. The transformation that followed was remarkable. Pinewood Estates seemed to breathe again, freed from the grip of manipulation. Within 2 weeks, Deborah and William quietly put their house on the market, listing it far below value for a quick exit. Rumors swirled, courtesy of Martha's extensive network, that they were heading to another state, to another gated community, perhaps one with stricter protections against freeloaders. Their moving day was awkwardly silent. No neighbors helped, no farewell gifts were exchanged. The only witness was Martha herself, seated in a lawn chair across the street, sipping tea and knitting. Every time Deborah glanced over, Martha raised her cup in a mocking toast. Gregory, humiliated, resigned as inspector, officially citing health issues. In truth, everyone knew his condition was embarrassment. He later apologized privately to several homeowners and faded so far into the background that newer residents had no idea who he was. Frank retired early, finally fleeing to Florida 3 months ahead of schedule, clearly relieved to escape the mess. The new board, under Brian's leadership, quickly rebuilt trust. They launched reform centered on fairness, instituting a transparent accounting system where every dollar of HOA fees was clearly itemized. They also installed proper EV charging stations, modern, efficient, and individually metered, ensuring that each resident paid for their own usage. I volunteered my expertise to help design the system, and it became a symbol of integrity and fairness in the neighborhood. Within half a year, several families confidently purchased electric vehicles, knowing they could now charge responsibly without burdening others. Though many neighbors urged me to run for the board, I declined. Endless meetings and bureaucratic squabbles weren't my calling. Instead, I agreed to serve as a technical advisor, ensuring our energy and security systems remained fair and secure. That role suited me perfectly. I could contribute without wasting hours debating mailbox colors or paint shades. Life quickly improved. The Thompsons' son rejoined baseball, and that very summer his team went on to win the regional championship. It felt like a sign that the community itself had finally found its footing again. The new board also set up a community watch program, one that focused on actual safety concerns instead of nitpicking over mailbox heights or lawn colors. Martha, ever the organizer, launched a community garden in a neglected corner of the common area. Soon it bloomed with vegetables and flowers, drawing neighbors together in a way no meeting agenda ever had. The vacant house next door was eventually sold to a young doctor and her husband, a programmer. They quickly proved to be the kind of neighbors every community hopes for, friendly but respectful, social when gatherings came around, yet never intrusive. They drove a simple hybrid car and even asked permission before putting in a small fountain that, technically, was a little larger than the regulations allowed. The new board approved it without hesitation, setting a tone of fairness and common sense. Every time I drive past the spot where Deborah once plugged in her Tesla, I can't help but smile. That space now holds an official charging station equipped with its own meter and transparent billing. The irony is unmistakable. Deborah could have had everything she wanted if she had simply chosen honesty and fairness. Instead, her arrogance cost her nearly $22,000 in car repairs, $7,000 in restitution, and the financial hit from a rushed home sale. Some people who live on power and privilege forget a hard truth: not every victim is defenseless. In this case, an electrical engineer with a protective system turned out to be the most expensive lesson a so-called Karen could ever face. There's a kind of poetry in it. Deborah arrived like a storm, bending rules to her will. But in the end, she was undone by the very electricity she tried to steal. Over coffee one morning, Martha summed it up perfectly, her eyes sparkling behind her glasses. You know what they say, karma doesn't need Wi-Fi to find the people who deserve it. I couldn't have agreed more. Sometimes justice comes through official channels, other times, it shows up in a carefully engineered package with warning lights people should really take seriously. The best part is what came after. The community is stronger now, neighbors talk more, keep an eye out for each other, and trust has been rebuilt under the new board. We're far from perfect in our neighborhood, Isa, but we've learned that when people unite against bullies, they win. And if there's one lesson I'll carry with me, it's this: electrical engineering skills may not make you the star of the party, but they sure come in handy when it's time to teach someone the true cost of power. Thanks for watching Anadrama Nest.